are the most precocious, overconfident, spoiled young man I've ever had the misfortune to meet.
It comes down to is you would risk your life for Ross before you would for me. That's the bottom line.
They were glamorous, untouchable, and larger than life. But behind the blinding spotlight and million-dollar smiles lurked a secret that could bring it all crashing down. Painkillers. Those little white pills weren't just prescriptions. They were lifelines turned dangerous obsessions. From rock icons to Hollywood legends, many stars fought this hidden battle in silence. But which names on this list will truly leave you gasping? Brace yourself, because some of these stories are darker than you think. Elvis Presley. The king of rock and roll had it all, except peace from his pain. Elvis Presley's life was a carnival of music, movies, and money, but behind closed doors he was in a losing war with his own body. Decades of relentless touring, exhausting film schedules, and unhealthy eating left him in constant discomfort. Doctors prescribed pills for sleep, for pain, for energy. Soon, prescriptions piled higher than his gold records. Elvis relied heavily on painkillers, especially codeine and Demerol, to keep moving at a pace no human could sustain. Friends recalled his bathroom cabinets looking more like a pharmacy than a celebrity's vanity. And the worst part? He didn't see it as an addiction. He thought of it as treatment, a necessity for survival in a punishing industry. By the mid-1970s, his public appearances showed the toll. Bloated, sweating, and slurring lyrics, Elvis was a shell of the man who once set stages on fire. Yet the crowd still roared, and he pushed himself deeper into chemical dependence. When he died in 1977 at just 42, toxicology reports revealed a deadly cocktail of painkillers in his system. Elvis wasn't just killed by fame or fortune. He was slowly undone by the very pills that promised him relief. Michael Jackson. The king of pop lived in pain most fans never saw. Michael Jackson's addiction to painkillers can be traced back to 1984, when a Pepsi commercial went horribly wrong. During the shoot, a pyrotechnic mishap set his hair on fire, leaving him with second-degree burns on his scalp. The pain was excruciating, and doctors turned to opioids like Demerol to ease his suffering. But what began as medical necessity soon became dependence. Jackson's grueling tours, his perfectionist rehearsals, and the constant pressure to perform only deepened his reliance on prescription drugs. Painkillers dulled the physical agony, but they also numbed the crushing stress of superstardom. Behind the glittering costumes and moonwalks was a man privately consumed by pills. His inner circle whispered about the bottles in his dressing rooms, about doctors always at his side with injections ready. Michael himself once admitted he had entered rehab for painkiller addiction, a rare public acknowledgement of a secret war. In June 2009, the world was stunned by his sudden death. While propofol was the central cause, painkillers had long been part of the destructive cocktail in his system. Michael's tragic downfall wasn't just about fame. It was about the dangerous comfort of painkillers, a promise of relief that turned lethal. Heath Ledger. He was young, talented, and unstoppable, until the pills took control. Heath Ledger wasn't just another Hollywood actor. By his mid-20s, he was already shaping himself into a legend. But behind his striking performances, especially his haunting Joker in The Dark Knight, he was wrestling with insomnia, back pain, and relentless anxiety. Ledger began leaning on prescription medications, painkillers, anti-anxiety pills, and sleeping aids to cope. He was often described by friends as restless, pacing at night, unable to shut his mind off. Painkillers seemed to offer an escape, but they quickly tangled him in dependence. While filming The Dark Knight, Heath threw himself so completely into the Joker's madness that he confessed to only sleeping 2 hours a night. Pills became his solution, though they created new problems. On January 22, 2008, Heath Ledger was found dead in his New York apartment. The toxicology report was chilling. oxycodone, hydrocodone, and other medications mixed fatally in his system. Ledger's passing shocked Hollywood not only because of his youth and talent, but because it highlighted how even rising stars could be quietly destroyed by painkillers. His Joker lives on as one of cinema's greatest performances, but it came at the highest possible cost. Prince. The Purple One's brilliance was matched only by his silence. Prince was a musical genius who redefined pop, funk, and rock, but he also carried a secret battle that few ever suspected. Behind his dazzling guitar riffs and flamboyant stage persona, he lived with crippling hip pain from years of high-energy performances, jumps, and splits that thrilled audiences worldwide. Doctors prescribed opioids to ease his suffering, and Prince, ever private, managed his addiction in the shadows. He reportedly used fentanyl, one of the most powerful painkillers available, often in doses that would alarm even seasoned physicians. To the public, he remained untouchable, still spinning out hits and mystique. But behind closed doors, the pills became both his savior and his prison. Even in his final years, Prince refused major surgery because it meant no longer being able to perform as he wanted. Instead, he leaned harder on the pills, hiding his dependence even from those closest to him. In April 2016, he was found dead in his Paisley Park estate, the autopsy confirming a fentanyl overdose. Prince's death was a stark reminder. Even icons who seem larger than life can be trapped by the smallest pills. His music remains immortal, but the silence he kept about painkillers speaks volumes. Whitney Houston. Her voice was heaven-sent, but her struggles were all too human. Whitney Houston was once the golden girl of music, her voice soaring effortlessly across octaves, her face gracing every magazine, her songs dominating the charts. But beyond the glitz, she was privately leaning on prescription drugs, including painkillers, to survive the pressures of fame and personal turmoil. Whitney's reliance on pills began quietly. Insiders claimed she used them not just for pain, but for stress and exhaustion from grueling tours and recording schedules. Painkillers dulled the relentless demands on her body and mind, but they also dulled the spark that made her performances legendary. In interviews, she often dodged questions about her health, but whispers of pill use circulated for years. When she appeared fragile and disoriented in later performances, the signs were hard to ignore. Painkillers, combined with other substances, had chipped away at her vitality. On February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was found lifeless in her hotel bathtub. The autopsy confirmed the presence of multiple substances, including prescription medications. Whitney's tragic end wasn't just about fame's toll, it was about how quietly painkillers crept into her life and refused to let go. Her story remains one of music's most heartbreaking cautionary tales. Rush Limbaugh. The voice that dominated American radio was drowning in silence behind the mic. Rush Limbaugh was known for his thunderous opinions, his booming laugh, and his ability to command millions of listeners every afternoon. But what his audience didn't hear was the steady hum of painkiller addiction shaping his off-air life. Limbaugh's problem began after spinal surgery in the 1990s. Doctors prescribed OxyContin and other opioids to help him heal, but the relief quickly turned into dependence. By the early 2000s, he was secretly taking handfuls of pills daily. He admitted later that his tolerance grew so high, he needed more than most pharmacies would ever dare to hand out. In 2003, the shocking news broke. Limbaugh was under investigation for illegally obtaining prescription painkillers through doctor shopping. His audience, used to hearing him rail against weakness, was stunned. Limbaugh publicly admitted his addiction and checked into rehab, saying he had been living a double life. Though he later returned to radio with renewed fire, the scars of his painkiller dependence never fully left his legacy. His voice may have been larger than life, but Rush's story showed that even the loudest figures can be silenced by the smallest pill. Matthew Perry. The funny man from Friends was anything but carefree off-screen. Matthew Perry made millions laugh as Chandler Bing, delivering one-liners with perfect timing. But behind the sitcom's smiles was a man quietly unraveling under the weight of painkillers. In 1997, Perry suffered a jet ski accident that left him with excruciating back pain. Doctors prescribed Vicodin, and Perry quickly discovered that the pills didn't just dull physical pain, they numbed his anxiety and insecurities. Soon, one pill wasn't enough. By his own admission, he was taking up to 55 Vicodin a day at his lowest point. The addiction turned his life into chaos. Perry's weight fluctuated wildly, his performances sometimes distracted by what he later called a fog. His co-stars, the very people who loved him most, often had no idea how bad it was. Perry became a master at hiding his dependency in plain sight. After years of denial, he eventually checked himself into rehab multiple times, speaking openly later about the hell he endured. He even turned his Malibu mansion into a sober living facility to help others battling the same demons. Perry's painkiller addiction wasn't just a Hollywood scandal. It was a human tragedy hidden under a laugh track. He showed us that even those who make us laugh the hardest may be hurting the most. Jamie Lee Curtis. Hollywood's scream queen was hiding a real-life horror story. Jamie Lee Curtis, beloved for Halloween and True Lies, seemed to have it all: talent, beauty, and longevity in a ruthless industry. But behind her success was a deeply private struggle with painkillers. Curtis revealed years later that her addiction began innocently in the late 1980s, after minor cosmetic surgery. Doctors prescribed her painkillers, and she quickly discovered their seductive power. She kept her secret for nearly a decade, popping pills quietly while building a career that seemed flawless to the outside world. She described sneaking pills from family medicine cabinets, living a double life where no one suspected the depths of her dependence. Unlike some stars, Curtis never spiraled publicly. Her discipline and secrecy made her addiction even more shocking when she admitted it. In 1999, she reached a breaking point and entered recovery. Since then, she has become one of the most outspoken celebrities about the dangers of painkiller addiction, calling herself a grateful addict in recovery. Curtis's story is a rare one in Hollywood, a tale of survival, redemption, and brutal honesty. While painkillers nearly stole her career, she reclaimed her life and now inspires others to do the same. Eminem. Slim Shady wasn't just battling critics, he was battling himself. Eminem's rise from Detroit's underground to global superstardom is the stuff of legend, but what fans didn't know was that the man spitting about survival was quietly losing his own fight to painkillers. His addiction started with Ambien and Vicodin, pills prescribed for sleep issues and exhaustion during grueling tours. The problem escalated quickly. Eminem admitted in later interviews that he was taking as many as 20 Vicodin a day, washing them down with Valium. He described the haze as a constant fog where he wasn't truly living, just existing. In 2007, the world nearly lost him when he overdosed and was rushed to the hospital. He later revealed doctors told him he was just hours from death. That wake-up call forced him into rehab and eventually recovery. But the scars lingered. His 2010 album Recovery wasn't just a title, it was his confessional. His survival story told through rap. Eminem's battle with painkillers reminds us that addiction doesn't discriminate. It can consume the biggest stars with the sharpest minds. His survival became proof that even when addiction tries to silence you, it doesn't always get the last verse. Elton John. Behind the sequins and piano ballads was a man quietly chained to pills. Elton John's flamboyant performances and timeless hits made him one of the greatest musicians of all time. But during his peak years in the 1980s, Elton was privately unraveling under the weight of addiction, including painkillers. At the height of his fame, Elton leaned on a cocktail of substances to keep up with the insane pressures of touring and stardom. Painkillers became part of the routine. They dulled the physical toll of years on the road, but they also offered escape from the crushing loneliness and insecurities he often masked with glitter and spectacle. In candid interviews years later, Elton admitted to going on days-long binges, numbing himself with pills until he barely remembered what had happened. Friends and fellow musicians recalled moments where he looked detached, almost ghost-like behind the flamboyant costumes. The turnaround came when Elton finally sought help in the early 1990s. Since then, he has been sober for decades, using his platform to speak out about the dangers of addiction. His battle with painkillers wasn't just a private war, it was a chapter in a larger story of survival and transformation. Elton's legacy proves that redemption is possible, even when addiction tries to steal the spotlight. Ozzy Osbourne. The Prince of Darkness had a pharmacy in his veins. Ozzy Osbourne, frontman of Black Sabbath, built a career on outrageous stunts and metal anthems. But away from the stage, his body was a wreck, broken bones, nerve damage, and decades of wear from his chaotic lifestyle. Painkillers became part of his daily existence. Ozzy admitted that prescription opioids were just as much a part of his routine as his morning tea. They dulled the constant pain, but left him foggy, stumbling through interviews, and often incoherent on stage. For years, fans assumed it was just Ozzy being Ozzy. In reality, he was drowning in pills. His wife Sharon later revealed the terrifying extent of his dependence, describing nights where she feared he wouldn't wake up. Even Ozzy himself joked that he was a medical miracle for surviving the sheer amount of drugs he put into his system. Today, after multiple stints in rehab and even reality TV exposure, Ozzy speaks candidly about his painkiller struggles. He's proof that addiction doesn't care whether you're a global rock god or just another person in pain. It can take you down either way. Steven Tyler. Aerosmith's frontman wasn't living on a prayer, he was living on painkillers. Steven Tyler, known for his screaming vocals and wild stage antics, spent decades hurtling across the globe in leather pants and scarves. But years of injuries, surgeries, and non-stop touring left him heavily dependent on opioids. Tyler revealed that his addiction to painkillers really deepened after multiple foot surgeries in the 2000s. He admitted he was popping so many pills that bandmates staged interventions. At one point, he was taking pills not to dull pain, but to keep the machine of Aerosmith moving. The show had to go on, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. His bandmates grew furious, blaming him for canceled shows and erratic behavior. Tyler eventually checked into rehab more than once, admitting that his painkiller habit had nearly cost him his career. Yet somehow, he turned it around. Clean and sober, Tyler later joked that he doesn't even trust himself with aspirin. His story is a reminder that even the loudest rockers can fall silent under the weight of addiction, but sometimes they find a way to roar back. Brett Favre. The NFL Golden Boy had a not-so-golden secret. Brett Favre was football royalty, the Green Bay Packers' Iron Man quarterback, tough as nails, playing through injuries that would sideline most athletes. But fans didn't know his toughness came at a chemical price. In the mid-1990s, Favre became addicted to Vicodin. It started after routine injuries, but soon the pills became his constant companion. He admitted later he was taking as many as 15 pills at once, staggering doses that could have killed him. In 1996, Favre publicly entered rehab after the NFL threatened suspension. His admission shocked fans who idolized his grit and all-American image. Yet it also humanized him. The man who seemed unbreakable was quietly breaking. Favre ultimately overcame his addiction and went on to cement his place in football history. But his candid confession years later showed that even heroes in shoulder pads can crumble under the smallest of pills. Winona Ryder. From Hollywood's sweetheart to a scandal in headlines, Painkillers were at the center. Winona Ryder was the indie queen of the 1990s, a star who seemed untouchable. But in 2001, her carefully guarded life cracked wide open. That year, Ryder was arrested in Beverly Hills for shoplifting. The shocking part wasn't just the theft, it was what police found in her possession. She was carrying a staggering number of prescription painkillers, including oxycodone and Vicodin, many under questionable prescriptions. The arrest sent shockwaves across Hollywood. Suddenly, Ryder wasn't the quirky star of Edward Scissorhands. She was a cautionary tale. She later admitted she had become dependent on painkillers after a painful surgery, and the habit had spiraled into secrecy and legal trouble. While her career took a serious hit, Ryder eventually clawed her way back with roles in Black Swan and Stranger Things. Her comeback proved she wasn't defined by that dark chapter. Still, her brush with painkillers left an indelible mark on her legacy. Charlie Sheen. Hollywood's wild child wasn't just partying, he was numbing. Charlie Sheen built his brand on chaos. From Platoon to 2.5 Men, he lived larger than life. But his long history of substance abuse also included a hidden reliance on painkillers. Insiders claimed Sheen leaned heavily on prescription opioids during periods of injury and exhaustion, masking the physical toll of his hard-living lifestyle. But painkillers didn't just ease pain, they gave him fuel to keep up his self-destructive pace. By the time his infamous Tiger Blood era hit in 2011, whispers about painkiller dependency were buried under louder scandals. Yet those who knew him closely said the pills were as much a part of the problem as anything else. Sheen's story is the perfect storm of fame, ego, and dependence. Painkillers weren't his only battle, but they were one more demon in a life defined by excess. Anna Nicole Smith. The bombshell's downfall was written in pills. Anna Nicole Smith captivated America with her Marilyn Monroe looks and outrageous reality show antics. But away from the cameras, her life was increasingly defined by prescription painkillers. Smith reportedly began using painkillers after multiple cosmetic surgeries, but the dependence only deepened after the tragic death of her son in 2006, a loss that devastated her. By then, painkillers weren't just for pain, they were for escape. When she was found dead in 2007 at just 39, the autopsy revealed a cocktail of prescription drugs, including powerful sedatives and opioids. The tragedy was worsened by reports that multiple doctors had supplied her prescriptions, raising questions about who enabled her spiral. Smith's addiction and death highlighted the dark side of celebrity medicine, where fame can mean easy access to dangerous prescriptions. Her story is a chilling reminder that painkillers don't just dull, they destroy. Heidi Montag. Reality TV fame came with a brutal price tag. Heidi Montag shot to stardom on the hills, but her off-screen life turned into a shocking tabloid saga. In 2010, Montag underwent a staggering 10 cosmetic surgeries in a single day, a decision that left her body wrecked and her life dependent on painkillers. Recovering from multiple procedures at once was agonizing. Montag later admitted she relied heavily on prescription opioids just to get through daily life. The pills dulled the pain, but they also dulled her spirit. Her dependency grew so intense that she said she almost died from overuse. Years later, Montag spoke openly about her regrets, not just about the surgeries, but about the painkiller addiction that followed. Unlike some celebrities, she survived, but her story exposed how quickly the glamour of Hollywood can twist into agony. Montag's ordeal stands as a warning. The quest for perfection in Hollywood often ends with pills, not applause. Corey Haim. The 80s heartthrob who couldn't escape the pills. Corey Haim was the poster. Boy of teen stardom, starring in The Lost Boys and charming audiences with his boyish grin. But Hollywood fame came with easy access to prescriptions, and Haim fell deep into the trap. He admitted to being hooked on painkillers by the time he was a teenager. Years of injuries, combined with Hollywood enablers, turned him into what tabloids cruelly dubbed a prescription addict. At his worst, he was taking dozens of pills daily, cycling through doctors who supplied him with endless prescriptions. By the 2000s, his addiction had destroyed his career and left him broke. Haim spoke publicly about his struggles, even appearing on reality shows that documented his attempts at sobriety. But the grip of painkillers was relentless. In 2010, Corey Haim died at just 38. While pneumonia was the official cause, his long history of painkiller abuse left him too weak to survive. His story is one of Hollywood's saddest cautionary tales, a reminder that fame doesn't protect you from the pharmacy trap. Courtney Love, the rock widow who turned to pills for comfort. Courtney Love has been many things: rock star, actress, tabloid fixture, and survivor. But one label she couldn't escape for years was painkiller addict. After the death of her husband Kurt Cobain, Love's life spiraled. Already prone to chaos, she leaned heavily on prescription opioids to numb both physical pain and deep emotional wounds. Arrests, custody battles, and onstage meltdowns often had painkillers lurking in the background. Love eventually admitted she was addicted to prescription opioids, including OxyContin. Her dependence fueled her reputation as unpredictable and volatile, overshadowing her genuine musical talent. While she has since claimed sobriety, her story remains tangled with the dangers of painkillers. Love's tale isn't just about grief, it's about how quickly painkillers can shift from comfort to curse. Judy Garland, the original Hollywood cautionary tale. Judy Garland was America's sweetheart, immortalized as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. But her life behind the rainbow was marked by a studio system that fed her pills, including painkillers, before she was even old enough to know better. Garland was given amphetamines to wake up, barbiturates to sleep, and painkillers to keep her performing through injuries and exhaustion. MGM executives wanted a product, not a person, and Judy was trapped in their machinery. By her 20s, Garland was dependent on pills for nearly every aspect of daily life. Painkillers weren't just a secret, they were a studio-sanctioned survival tool. The addiction haunted her for decades, wrecking her health and fueling her financial and personal struggles. In 1969, Judy Garland died at just 47. Officially, the cause was an overdose of barbiturates, but her lifelong dependence on pills of every kind, including painkillers, set the stage for her tragic decline. Garland's story was one of the earliest celebrity warnings. Even the brightest stars can be dimmed by the pharmaceutical shadows that lurk behind Hollywood glamour. Corey Monteith. The golden boy of Glee carried a secret weight. Corey Monteith's role as Finn Hudson turned him into a global teen idol, the wholesome quarterback with a microphone. But off-screen, Monteith was living a far less perfect script. He admitted that his struggles with substances began as a teenager, and painkillers quickly joined the mix. Injuries and exhaustion from filming and touring only deepened his reliance. Monteith entered rehab more than once, telling interviewers he had a serious problem that fame only made easier to hide. Friends and colleagues often described him as warm and generous, but even they didn't realize how bad his dependency had become. He managed to keep up appearances until he couldn't. In July 2013, the world was stunned when Corey Monteith was found dead in a Vancouver hotel room. The autopsy revealed a toxic cocktail that included heroin and prescription drugs. Painkillers, meant to dull, had instead destroyed. Monteith's tragic fall was another reminder that behind the bright lights of stardom, many stars are fighting invisible battles. Liza Minnelli. The daughter of Judy Garland was haunted by the same demons. Liza Minnelli dazzled the world with Cabaret, becoming one of Broadway and Hollywood's greatest triple threats. But like her mother, she found herself leaning on painkillers to survive fame's toll. Minnelli's health issues were no secret. She endured multiple surgeries, including 2 hip replacements and serious back problems. Each procedure came with prescriptions. Each prescription came with risk. Soon, painkillers weren't just for recovery. They became a crutch. Reports surfaced in the 1980s and 1990s of Minnelli entering rehab clinics for painkiller dependence. Behind the glitz, she was struggling to find balance between a demanding career and a body constantly betraying her. Insiders described her as charming and brilliant on stage, but often fragile and dependent off it. Even later in life, whispers about her pill use persisted. Painkillers shadowed her story much like they did her mother's, proving how generational cycles of addiction can echo across decades. Liza Minnelli's life reminds us that even stars born into fame can't escape the pull of painkillers. They don't just dull pain, they rewrite legacies. Robin Williams. The man who made the world laugh was quietly hurting. Robin Williams was a comedic genius, flipping from stand-up to Oscar-winning drama with lightning speed. But the pressures of constant reinvention, coupled with chronic health issues, left him vulnerable to prescription drugs. Williams openly discussed his struggles with alcohol and other substances. Less known was his battle with painkillers, which he reportedly leaned on during medical issues and injuries later in life. Pills became part of the complex fight he was waging with both his body and mind. Those closest to him said Robin often used humor to deflect from real pain. Behind the improvisations and voices was a man carrying battles far heavier than his audiences could ever imagine. Though his story ended tragically in 2014, whispers of painkiller dependence remain part of the larger picture of a man undone by hidden health struggles. For fans, it's a devastating reminder. Even the brightest smile on screen can be covering unimaginable pain off it. Lindsay Lohan. Hollywood's favorite wild child had a prescription sidekick. Lindsay Lohan went from The Parent Trap to Mean Girls, becoming one of the most recognizable faces of the 2000s. But as her fame skyrocketed, so did her troubles. Behind the DUIs, rehab stays, and courtroom appearances was a quieter issue: painkiller dependence. After a car crash and several medical issues in her 20s, Lohan was reportedly prescribed opioids. The relief soon turned into reliance. Pills became part of her lifestyle, often hidden beneath her more public scandals. In 2010, court documents revealed she was regularly taking prescription opioids, fueling speculation that painkillers were one of the many substances derailing her career. Her erratic behavior, missed film shoots, and repeated stints in rehab all bore the hallmarks of someone trapped in dependence. Though she's since attempted comebacks, Lohan's legacy remains tied to those tumultuous years when painkillers were whispering in the background, amplifying the chaos. Her story is a stark example of how painkillers don't just dull pain, they can wreck careers, reputations, and futures. Philip Seymour Hoffman. One of Hollywood's greatest actors lost to the smallest of pills. Philip Seymour Hoffman was a master of transformation, winning an Oscar for Capote and earning acclaim in countless roles. But even as he delivered brilliance on screen, his off-screen battles grew darker. Hoffman struggled with substance abuse early in his career, but relapsed after years of sobriety. Painkillers, particularly opioids, were a big part of that spiral. After an injury in 2012, he reportedly turned to prescription opioids, which eventually led him back to heroin. In February 2014, Hoffman was found dead in his New York apartment with dozens of bags of drugs nearby. While heroin was the final blow, painkillers had set the stage for his relapse. Friends said the pills were his gateway back into a world he had fought so hard to leave. Hoffman's death stunned Hollywood. He wasn't just another troubled star, He was a true artist whose demons proved deadlier than his craft was strong. His story is a chilling reminder of how painkillers can drag even the most brilliant minds into the abyss. Macaulay Culkin. The child star who couldn't outgrow the pills, Macaulay Culkin defined the 1990s with Home Alone, becoming the most famous kid in the world. But when the cameras dimmed, Culkin's life turned darker. By his late teens and 20s, reports swirled of Culkin's reliance on painkillers. After years of being thrust into the spotlight, the physical and emotional toll left him vulnerable to prescriptions. Though he denied heavy addiction at times, insiders and tabloid reports pointed to pills being part of his troubled years. In 2004, Culkin was arrested for possession of prescription medications without proper documentation. It was a shocking headline for fans who remembered the cute Kevin McAllister setting traps for burglars, though he's since stepped away from the chaos of his youth, focusing on smaller projects and fatherhood. Culkin's story is another example of how painkillers haunted a generation of child stars. They didn't just dull pain, they stole innocence. Roseanne Barr. The sitcom queen had her own off-screen punchline, and it wasn't funny. Roseanne Barr became a household name with her groundbreaking sitcom Roseanne, celebrated for its raw look at working-class America. But behind the laughter, Barr was living with a secret painkiller dependence. Barr later admitted that she was prescribed opioids after multiple health issues, including a hysterectomy and chronic back pain. The pills dulled her pain, but also left her increasingly erratic and dependent. She described herself as being addicted to everything they gave me, confessing that painkillers nearly derailed her career during the show's early years. At one point, she admitted she would take pills before walking onto the set just to get through tapings. Although she eventually moved past her dependency, her confession painted a darker picture of her comedic empire. Roseanne wasn't just battling TV executives or critics, she was battling her own medicine cabinet. Kelly Osbourne. The rock princess carried her father's curse. Kelly Osbourne grew up in the shadow of Ozzy, and unfortunately, she inherited more than just fame. Kelly admitted that she became addicted to painkillers at just 13 years old after a routine tonsil surgery. What started as prescribed relief quickly turned into daily dependence. By her teens and 20s, Kelly was openly struggling with pills, cycling in and out of rehab, and often appearing on reality TV in states that hinted at her battles. She later said the pills gave her a sense of calm she couldn't find anywhere else. But that calm came with chaos. Addiction cost her relationships, opportunities, and years of her youth. Kelly eventually spoke candidly about her recovery, crediting her family's support and her own determination. But her story shows how painkiller addiction doesn't just haunt individuals, it can echo across generations. Howard Hughes. The billionaire recluse was powered by codeine. Howard Hughes was one of the most enigmatic figures of the 20th century. Film mogul, aviation pioneer, and eccentric billionaire. But much of his later life was ruled not by genius, but by painkillers. Hughes suffered multiple plane crashes that left him with chronic pain. Doctors prescribed him codeine and other opioids, which he used obsessively. Over time, his tolerance skyrocketed, and so did his paranoia. Friends and aides described him as a prisoner of pills, locked in hotel rooms, living in near total isolation. By the 1960s, Hughes was a shell of his former self. His once brilliant mind was clouded, his body ravaged, and his every action dictated by his dependence on painkillers. He reportedly had aides inject him with codeine daily, an addiction that ruled him more completely than his empire ever did. Hughes's life is proof that even billionaires can't buy freedom from addiction. His empire stood tall, but he crumbled under the weight of pills. Judy Garland. The tragedy that started it all. Judy Garland deserves a second mention here, because her story wasn't just personal, It became the blueprint for Hollywood's pill problem. From her teenage years at MGM, Garland was given pills to keep her thin, awake, and performing. But alongside the stimulants were painkillers, used to mask injuries from relentless filming schedules. Over time, she became dependent, living on a chemical routine that Hollywood executives normalized. By the time she hit her 30s, Garland's life was a constant cycle of performing, collapsing, and recovering with pills. Painkillers became her silent partner in a career that dazzled millions. Her death at 47 was officially from barbiturates, but her lifelong dependence on painkillers helped pave the way to tragedy. Garland's story remains a haunting reminder of how Hollywood's golden age exploited stars with prescriptions, and how that legacy continues to echo today. From Elvis to Garland, from Eminem to Prince, these stories prove one thing: painkillers don't care about fame, fortune, or talent. They whisper promises of relief, but often deliver destruction. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs a wake-up call, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold celebrity truths, because behind every glittering spotlight, there's always a shadow worth exposing.